Hello everyone, good afternoon to you, and I hope this finds you well. This is our first Bath Life Business Surgery of the year, and we're absolutely delighted to have another session again, once more, with the University of Bath School of Management. This time it's about sustainability, ethics and idealism, how far they matter in businesses and maybe mattering more. We'll be exploring a whole variety of different themes related to this. My name is Greg Ingham and I'm from Bath Life's publisher Media Clash, and thank you very much for joining us today. It's the latest in our series of exploration of business with the university, where we try to meld academic theory with commercial practice, providing research insights and business inter-business activities. So how central is ethical thinking to business? How much responsibility should businesses have for the societies in which they operate? Is the current focus on CSR and sustainability merely the latest iteration of progressive thinking, arguably stretching back to 19th century paternalism? Or is there something more profound and enduring at work here? And then as a complete stand back, what role do universities play, and especially the University of Bath, in promoting new business values? Stimulation, information, and prompts to action await you today as we delve into these topics with the University of Bath's School of Management. So we'll be speaking, as you can see from the slide, we'll be speaking with Annie Snelson-Powell, a lecturer at the University of Bath School of Management, and David Kelly, Chief Exec of local tech company Storm Consultancy, and actually really interestingly, an alumnus, we are in academic circles, an alumnus of the uni. His business was effectively started while he was a student here in Bath. Please do send your questions using the Q&A button at the bottom. Please do join in with that. Give them anonymously or named as you wish. And please note, you may have realized, of course, that our business surgery is being recorded today and will shortly be on our YouTube channel. A few things before we get started. Forthcoming business surgeries. These are bespoke deep dive sessions showcasing companies' and organizations' expertise and thinking through discussion. They can be a valuable way to help you build profile, prompt relationships, and generate more business for 2023. And there'll be more, of course, to come during 2023, both with the university, but also with commercial organizations. Do talk to us about how you may wish to be involved with those. They're covered through Bath Life itself, through social media, and of course, then there's an enduring value as part of our YouTube repository. Bath Life Awards. There's a timely point here in two respects. One, you'll see on the right that the nominations are open currently, but closing shortly. 24th of Jan, time is just flying already this time of year. These are sort of joyous, unrivaled, effective celebrations, uber glamorous ways to celebrate the very best of Bath, covering, of course, both elements, amongst many others, that we're talking about today, of education and the academic world, but also technology. The timely point is this. Back in the day, and we don't quite know when, probably about 2012, 2013 or some such, David Kelly and his merry band were students at Bath University, and it started as a sort of part-time thing, as web development business, which gave birth to Storm Consultancy, and Storm were chosen by our esteemed judges, God bless the judges, as the winner of the new business back in the day, about a good 10 years back, possibly longer. But in terms of talent spotting, the awards do provide that opportunity for all different sorts of businesses. There's a whole roster of sponsors. I won't list the full number, but you'll see there Doubletree by Hilton as our headline sponsor. There are commercial opportunities available still, so please do talk to our team if you wish to be involved. There's also, by the way, there's a how to benefit webinar, which, there we are, there's actually a QR code, which may seem a little bit odd, but if you scan that QR code, you'll be taken straight to that how to benefit webinar. On the one hand, how to make sure you hone your nomination to best effect, the other, where there are commercial opportunities for you, as well as giving all the key dates and so on. Coming up a little bit after the awards, we've got the Property Symposium on April 21st. It's on the future of the city. What will be different in cities in 2030, 2040? What impact for planning, developers, architects? How has the pandemic accelerated or at least affected thinking? Much to cover. We're running it as an in-person event, as you can see, Friday, 21st of April, and that's at the M Shed in Bristol. Please do talk to us again if you wish to be involved, either commercially or in terms of content. Or do both. There is also EntreConf coming up later in the year, our Entrepreneurs Conference, where Storm have been a key backer of EntreConf, as has the University of Bath. So again, it's timely. This is a conference in a sense, born of the pandemic, the realization that there were an incredible number of valuable, exciting, dynamic new businesses, startups, scale-ups, those planning exits, all operating within the wider South West and South Wales region. So we began this conference. It's returning, it'll be in real life, and we'll have some details on that shortly, a bit of a tease. But the important point is that, as you can see from the tag, the future is unwritten, and it's entrepreneurs who are writing that future. And we're absolutely delighted with the support which we've had. Wearing a different hat, a different, oh God, here it comes, chapeau, who knows, is the Bath Bull. This is, there you go, a joyous event in end of June, beginning of July. Again, we'll have an announcement about the exact timing of that, because we are changing it this year. That'll come up shortly. Tickets go on sale and so on. For those who don't know it, it's a terrific opportunity to bring together the businesses, the charities, the residents, anyone connected with Bath. 1, to have fun, 2, to compete, at least notionally, but 3, and fundamentally, to raise money for charity. Cumulatively, of the order of £750,000 has been raised for local charities so far. So look out for the announcement. Please join in. It's just a lovely occasion. And after all, we do need those lovely occasions, particularly in the depth of winter. Look, all this summer almost makes you feel cold. Look at them in shorts and t-shirts. There you go. So we come on now to last up is Bath Live. Last up, in a sense, first up. It's at the absolute core of what we do as a business in Bath. You can see some joyous, gorgeous covers here. It's a lovely activity to be able to celebrate all that's best in Bath. There's an editorial team. The remit is go find the good stuff, and each issue, each fortnight, Sarah, Lydia and the team, and Matt also, Bilby, are doing that issue in, issue out. It'll be our 21st anniversary, which is looming this summer, and thank you for all your support. Right, let's do this. That's enough of that. Let's come on to our speakers today. Let's bring forward Annie and David, if we may. There they are in all their glory, and I never doubted the technology would work. Never failed to say. You both well?
Yeah, well, thanks, Greg.
Yes, thank you.
Good. And for those who may be less familiar, just a quick run through the bio. Annie is a lecturer of business society at the School of Management at the University of Bath. Research interests involve questions of corporate policy action, alignment, or even misalignments in relation to sustainability and human rights. Publishes in leading academic journals and has provided commentary to media outlets, including the Wall Street Journal and The Economist. And we're absolutely delighted, Annie, to have you here today. And as mentioned at the beginning, we're going to start with a little bit of theory and maybe a little bit of research, but then come into the practice commercially. David is an investor and an entrepreneur. I've touched on already Storm Consultancy. And by the way, a Queen's Award-winning B Corp, and we'll be talking about B Corp as well. Also named Tech Company of the Year in the Tech Southwest. And as mentioned, that new business award at Bath Life Awards, and co-founder of the Co-Forest Project, itself a superb initiative, demonstrably sustainable. That is its raison d'etre, after all. As well as chairman of University of Bath Life Science spinout CiteAb as well. Annie, David, welcome.
Thank you.
Much to cover. So Annie, let's start with you. Is there actually much evidence, I'm aware that's a bit of a freighted term for an academic world, but much evidence or indication that sustainability and ethics and even idealism is actually increasing for business? Or is this just the latest iteration of progressive business thinking that goes, God knows, back to 19th century paternalism?
Thank you. Well, that's a wonderful question, isn't it, to get us going? And thank you so much for having me. It's wonderful to have this opportunity to be part of this series of sessions. But fabulous question, you know, what's the evidence that things from a sustainability perspective? And I focus on corporate sustainability here. So thinking about the actions that firms take to be more sustainable is happening. And I think we're seeing it, all of us are seeing it around us more and more, that these things are mattering more, that they're brought to our attention all the time. And certainly that's true in my experience at the university. So in the School of Management, my research is focused on this issue. In terms of the research I do, it has been fertile ground, I would say, over the past few years. I've been looking at different contexts, different situations. So we've talked about CSR, sustainability and human rights already. So these are the kind of things I study. But then I look in particular at how firms implement their sustainability commitments. So absolutely, we're seeing way more activity. This is massively increasing. Firms are signing up to sustainability standards and initiatives. They're coming up with policies and promises, commitments on sustainability, and devising new strategies all the time. I think what's really interesting is perhaps that these actions are not always very well linked to impact. And so sometimes we see that lag with the aspiration. And that's what I do. I look at what it would take for firms to do more to implement their sustainability promises. And in terms of your sort of question about whether this is kind of taking off for real, I think from a research perspective, it is such a focal issue at Bath University. When I first joined in 2010, we had, one of the largest centres for research on CSR and sustainability at the time. It's called the Centre for Business Organisations and Society. We were maybe 15 or 20 people at that time, and now I had a quick look at the website, and the members are around about 100, involving at least 49 faculty members, where this is the main thing that they look at. So there is this increasing evidence base about what's going on, and all these proliferating questions are getting some attention.
And I guess, and we will touch on this, I guess, so part of, if not the issue, one of the things to address for businesses is that long time frame. Many of these initiatives are absolutely, out there in the future. And at the same time, many businesses have to focus on the near term, the short term. There's that Eliot line that between the thought and the action falls the shadow. And the shadow of recession or whatever doesn't tend to help. But I wanted to come on to this related point. Do you think there's any form of, again, I hesitate because in academic, you absolutely want to be able to sort of prove the evidence, any form of correlation or connection between progressive business values and commercial success?
I think that's really interesting. I think we can see certainly that's one kind of pathway for business success at the moment, is to really focus on those values. But I would say there's a whole variety of different ways in which firms can connect with the sustainability agenda, and the extent to which they use it more as window dressing, and the extent to which it is, like you say, part of their core values. So I would say we're seeing a kind of range of those at the moment, and they're all increasing. So we're seeing, and I'm sure everyone can identify examples of all of these things around them. There are plenty of motivations right now for firms to do sustainability. That might be simply to consume less energy, so reduce their emissions by consuming less energy. They might therefore be very focused on efficiency in their operations and in their supply chain. And that might be for efficiency purposes. And it's a very kind of economic consideration, but at the same time, it's bringing through the values we've been talking about progressively being more sustainable. So sustainability and business can go hand in hand quite well. And like you say, the perspective probably has to shift a little for that to hold, to the extent that if we're looking at quarterly performance, then perhaps that's harder to implement the plans that are really going to connect those economic and environmental considerations together. And we would say perhaps it's those longer term initiatives that have that stronger connection between the two.
Yeah, and we will come on to that motivation point. It's something, there's elements sometimes of angels and devils. People do things for multiple reasons, and the front end of which is the good stuff, as it were. But to bring you in, Dave, as well on this point, why do you think there has been a rise in this approach? Is it ultimately enlightened self-interest?
Yeah, that's the question, isn't it? The $1 million question. If you look back over the history of business, there are always fads, and the fads that we ultimately will add to the performance of organizations in the long run tend to stick around and become norm. And what we've all clearly got our fingers crossed for, those of us who care about the sustainability, the ethics, the environmental impact that organizations can have, we're very much hoping that this is a fad that becomes a norm. And I would probably say that there are two drivers. So you've either got your kind of enlightened self-interest where, well, there might just be self-interest in, it may be there's a personal values alignment. You may be in your personal life following a set of values that you have the influence in your business to bring forward, which is
and And just on that point, is that you? Is in part, is this directly your own personal value?
I think we are we are lucky enough that I absolutely have got, it should be obvious that as the leader of a business and the owner of a business, my personal values absolutely should be reflected by the business. And yes, they are. We sit in that beautiful intersection where we also are very consumer facing, in as much as we're not 4 steps removed down a supply chain. Therefore, we get the added benefit of a lot of what we do is the enlightened self-interest. So we can use the work that we do as part of our brand, as part of our messaging, as part of our differentiation. So I think we get the win-win, that it's what we want to do and it helps our business. Therefore, it's an absolute no-brainer and everybody can move in the same direction. I think it's harder when you lose one of those two things. So perhaps you're a large organization where there's demand from your consumer base to do something, but intrinsically your management team or your investment team they're not believing it. They're kind of feeling forced into that's going to cause friction. And equally the other way around, you might have an organization that really wants to be sustainable, but that might introduce cost or overhead into the business in terms of doing so, and perhaps you're being squeezed by a big name supermarket for every quarter penny, and it's really difficult for you to alter your positioning in a market to justify the additional cost that perhaps doing some of these sorts of initiatives would incur. So yeah, Storm's incredibly lucky that we sit at the intersection where it's what I want and it benefits us. But I suspect the reason why we haven't seen the mass adoption is that the early adopters on that adopter curve are organizations that fit more into our pocket. The later adopters will be those who are either trying to climb their way up or are being forced up.
Right. Well, let's come to a standback point directly in this area. Why should companies have a responsibility to the society in which they operate? After all, for decades, the primary, often exclusive role of a company was to return the greatest value to its shareholders. Concentrate on profit, solve the rest.
Okay, I can. Well, fundamentally, organizations are legal entities, and at their fundamental core, they are the same as any other living legal individual. And I think that we all have, and we all do have a responsibility to our society. So to say that an organization is different simply because it's got a different parental structure in shareholders, for me, yeah, is perhaps a little misguided. I think that
shareholders, of course, includes owners. So it's whatever the ownership is, that ultimately businesses have, as I say, for decades, that's their sole function in life. Maybe Annie, on this point, have you had a sense of shift in what businesses are for? Because this is quite fundamental in business.
I think that's such an interesting question. I think why should they is a bit dependent on who they are. I can think of very many reasons why, lots and lots of different ways in which they can prosper. But I think just keying in also to something that David just was talking about in terms of those values, and what we're seeing in terms of the shifts in attitudes towards businesses that are there not just for profit. This idea that we're maximizing profits at all costs is something that I would say has shifted. And I think if you did an MBA 15 or 20 years ago, that would have been what you were told. And I would like to think that that's certainly not the message you'd receive from an MBA these days. In terms of the students, I think it's really interesting to think about this question, because going back actually not that long ago, I would put effort into this very question and really helping them to engage with why they should care about sustainability, care about responsible business practices when they go into the workplace. And I would say these days they're sold already when they walk in the door. So we also have greater numbers of students taking electives in corporate responsibility in this kind of sustainability related area, but when they arrive, they're super engaged, and I think they already anticipate the relevance of this knowledge on sustainability across all business functions. They see those links, and I think they also understand that employers are going to value these skills. So for the future, sustainability is coming up as a key theme that's growing. And I think they're very attuned to that market, and what's going to be required of them as capable managers is to have the critical thinking skills to be able to resolve what are quite tricky questions. So I think that's shifted, and it's not because we've done something different to the students. I would say it's not because we're teaching them a different paradigm, actually, although I'd like to think that we do give them really useful knowledge and skills whilst they're here. I think they actually come in with this shift embedded already. So I'd say students more recently come, and I work at the university with the admissions team, and we've learned by looking at personal statements that actually some of the aims that at least that students espouse before they even get here are to do with making a difference. So they want to be making a strong impact for their communities, having some kind of contribution. And I suppose that's a shift away from this focus on their own personal wealth, their own financial success is not so sort of key, it's not so central to what they're expressing about themselves. And that's even before they arrive. So I do think
in a sense, the university, like any large organization, is both following but also leading. And we'll come on to that, the role of the university in promoting new business thinking. Slightly scary thought, by the way, if those MBA students of maybe 15 years ago, they're going to be late 30s, early 40s, whatever now, they will be in middle to senior management positions, and they've got those values. And there's a slight generational shift happening here, that certainly when it comes to recruitment, it's quite clear that values in business are increasingly important, and that means increasingly through from the first jobbers up. I want to come to you as a then first job. That's a really rubbish link, but there you go, David. Back to your days at the uni. Talk us through those early days and your thinking then as you were developing a business. How important was having a set of values to you when you started Storm at the University of Bath?
I can absolutely say that language like values and purpose were used in a minutiae compared to they are today. They're terms that hadn't yet been properly popularized. They certainly weren't being taught and I'm sure the way they are being today. And as such, I think that this is where you sort of come back to that difference between the business driver versus the personal entrepreneurial driver. I undoubtedly had a set of values and a set of principles, and I'll tell you those in a moment. But I probably couldn't have identified them as a set of business values at that point. They were more just kind of almost goals. So we started Storm with the idea that we were very heavy on work-life balance when we started. Even in our first year, we weren't working on Friday afternoons. We had an unlimited holiday policy, and there were a bunch of kind of things around the way in which we wanted to treat us and our staff, and there were equally kind of aspirational values around the types of client that we wanted to work for. But that was utterly unconnected to the success of the business, because at that point we hadn't made a success of the business. We didn't know whether those things would or wouldn't contribute towards that. So they were entirely driven by us thinking that'd be a fantastic thing to do, let's go for it. I think as we've gone over time, and this is one of the reasons I think we've been very lucky, and especially in the B Corp space, is we've realized that our business was by hook or crook or by chance, it was predicated on a lot of the values that happened to become valued by certification like B Corp. So when we went through that B Corp process, we really were doing an audit, and whereas a lot of businesses have to implement quite a lot of change in order to become certified, we realized we were really dotting I's and crossing T's, because 90+% of what we already did was exactly what they were looking for, which is fantastic and testimony to the business that had been built from then. But yes, back in those university days, it's undoubted that entrepreneurs will have their intrinsic values, whether or not they have identified them and whether or not they have had the foresight to draw them through and work out how they're going to use those commercially to work in their benefit, whether it's for attracting talent, for attracting customers, or that I would say there was a great deal of naive optimism when I started, and so there was a colossal amount of stuff I didn't know, and this was definitely part of it.
I think sometimes not knowing what you don't know is actually a really useful driver. Just get on and do and learn.
Absolutely.
Yeah. If you can thrive within that context, then that's a very helpful start. But moving and talking about now, by the way, how big is your team currently?
So Storm is 15 at the moment.
Right. So 15 people. It's a good sized business. Can you now, and does it matter? Can you correlate your values to success either internally with the team, or perhaps when recruiting, or externally with clients? Or is it just so baked in that you can't sort of disaggregate it?
We actually had a debate about this a handful of us before Christmas, where the jump to answer is, well, of course we can. You can definitely correlate. You know, here is a picture of success, and here are the things that we do. And somebody very interestingly pointed out, but we don't know what it would look like if we strip back all of the nice things, or complete, you know, insert expletive here, and rinsed every penny we could get. So the irony is, we don't know what it would look like on the other side. So can you correlate what we do to our current view of success? Yes, absolutely. For someone else, they might look at the business with a different lens on what success looks like, and would say, well, no, in fact, those things are holding you back. And I suspect that it's you sort of Dragon's Den scenario. And we've been lucky enough to work with a number of companies who've gone through all types of investment round, angel, seeds, series A, B, C, and you notice that as those different viewpoints, especially corporate finance and corporate capital, come in, they've got a very different view, and sometimes they are at odds fundamentally with the organization's leadership, and that can be quite the struggle. So
and sorry to cut across, but I want to pick up that point both specifically for Storm, but then more generally, Annie, in your experience. When it comes to seeking partnerships or stakes in businesses or whatever, where does progressive thinking sit as a criterion, either for you with the companies you partner with, or for those looking to partner with you? Does it actually matter? Do you not work with companies that don't have similar values? And Annie, perhaps pick the more general point from that as well. To Dave first.
So I think that it's not a prerequisite, but we would like to think that company was at least influenceable. So if we were dealing with a stubborn company who are set in their ways that was at odds, then that would not be a good indicator of a successful partnership. If they're an organization that perhaps is somewhere in the middle ground, they're open to a conversation, and we actually think we can bring some value there, then that's almost even better than an organization that's already there, because there's a chance to create an alignment and also hopefully make their organization better as you're going.
Yeah. Okay. And Annie, in your experience, both from perhaps from a research point of view, but also even anecdotally and direct experience, is this a factor? Do people, is it a question they do what they do and they do what they think is right, and it doesn't matter what others do? Or do people seek out those like-minded businesses and only partner with?
I just think this is a really fascinating question, and I was really enjoying hearing how David was talking about these ideas. I think from my perspective, I would say that the idea of progressive values is really interesting and something for students perhaps to explore and reflect upon. But what's also interesting, what David said, is that, you know, as determined by who. So what progressive values might be in one context might be quite different, and perhaps in contradiction with another context. So I think the whole area of sustainability is very reliant on that intelligent interaction and critical thinking that allows you to assess your situation. So you can have different parts of the supply chain where things are going to look very different in terms of the decisions that you're going to be making. So, you know, it's a fantastic question, but it's not one that we have written down in a textbook that we can hand out to students and say, you know, these are the values for you to embody. We want you to learn them and then become them. It's a kind of two-way street. And certainly that's something we're looking to activate in students, is their own capacities. And David was saying, oh, I don't think I was taught this when I came to university, but nonetheless, that process happened for him. And that would be really interesting to understand how that was triggered. So, you know, it might be that the process of coming to university, making those connections, having those networks, being in business scenarios starts to activate your own inquiry about who you want to be as a leader. And I think when I hear David talk, the other thing that occurs to me as being really fundamental to this is the imagination. So I think his success, and this is a guess, but is probably down to that creativity, that freedom that happened as he set up his business to create the business he wanted to, and to do that in such a way where he was free to think ahead. And I think that's something with sustainability that you know, we really have to focus on, is this. You know, we don't actually have the answers. We could very easily fall into traps, promise the world and not be able to deliver on it. actually we need to be super curious about what's going on, how we can respond to it, and then somehow innovate and be creative. So there's a lot to expect when it comes to being sustainable. And I think, yes, I mean, not to completely avoid the question, I think, yes, this notion of progressive values beyond profit maximization is certainly a really important starting point from which to have these discussions. But what they'll look like for each individual is going to be very dependent on themselves, but also on what they can bring, what they can offer, how they see the world, and also on the context in which they want to operate.
It's almost that, you know, those hours of debate and discussion and analysis get boiled down to a charter and some bullets, which are one, you know, sometimes pretty simplistic, and two, inevitably out of date by the time they've all been agreed by everyone around the table. So let's come to you, David, on this exact point. What role did the university play in shaping your business values? Overt, passive, consequential, gave you that opportunity?
So I think probably the biggest influence was in the placements. So one of the reasons that I chose to study at Bath in the School of Management was because it was a dual placement. So rather than a single organization with a single lens on the world, we got to experience 2 6-month placements. I chose very different organizations in different sectors, but overlapping in that great Venn diagram of the sky where I wanted to be. And that I distinctly remember being in both organizations, spotting things that I thought were, well, let's be polite and say they were suboptimal or something.
Oh, you are far too polite.
I wouldn't be doing. And so that is exactly what I think Annie's just described, in that those situations took me outside of the academic context. They put me into an organization where I had the security of being there for 6 months, and I knew that there was you're there to learn as well as to do. So that is the freedom, I think, that Annie, or part of the freedom Annie might be talking about, in terms of having the space to sit back and think about those organizations fundamentally, rather than specifically your role within them and what numbers you're supposed to be crunching on any given Tuesday.
Yeah.
So I think that's probably the biggest part the university gave in respect of the opportunity.
Yeah, and I've got an interesting comment I'm going to bring in from Beata Cosgrove shortly. But the impossible counterfactual for you: had you not been at the university, what difference might there have been? Aren't you, quote, just that person, regardless, and the uni was perhaps incidental to it?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I'll go and grab my crystal ball from the third drawer down and let you know. But
yeah, cheeky monkey.
It's a perfectly reasonable question. I think that I was about to say my entrepreneurial journey, and I just had a shiver down my spine. I don't like the sound of that at all. But if I look back across, I've enjoyed entrepreneurial activities since I was at school. I did the Young Enterprise Society and ended up as Young Entrepreneur of the Year. We were selling recycled CD clocks to the Eden Project. Actually, they had them in their shop when the Eden Project opened. There are various anecdotal stories that I could tell you about how Adam and I had played with various different elements and aspects of business, completely aside from tech, throughout our university careers. So there absolutely was an element. I was fairly sure I set on a path towards entrepreneurialism, and already forming the university's early intervention. Clearly, you're there to get a fundamental, and the BBA, which I did, the Bachelor of Business Administration, certainly at its time was there to give you a significant breadth. It was not a depth application. No. You were not going to come out as a lawyer or an accountant, or you were there for that whole breadth, and so that was invaluable from an underpinning. But as I said, the opportunity to go and work in organizations that you otherwise may not have been able to walk into because you weren't a Bath placement student was the bit that let me look at other organizations in a way I hadn't yet. And I have since been unemployed in as much as only by myself. Since those placements, no one else has ever employed me, only me.
So Annie, you can have that as a slogan.
Points.
Do an MBA at Bath University and be unemployed. Do you think that'll work? Maybe not. I'm going to bring in a comment from Beata Cosgrove, a sort of near contemporary of yours, David, at University of Bath. She said she did her MBA at Bath. 12 years ago, so possibly a little bit after you. She says she reevaluates her values on a daily basis. You adapt to climate change around us. She has a business which consumes less energy, solar panels. I use solar energy for my business. Also now mainly use an electric bike for transport, insulated my house. Great. And then the standback points. What the MBA gave me was to look forward to future and imagination, what could happen in the future and how to react to it. It's fostering that curiosity, I guess, and understanding of the society. So to you, Annie, this is a point for you personally, but also for the university. How far do you see the university's role here as a proselytizer, promoting progressive thinking in young entrepreneurs or students?
So it's an interesting question. I do think about this a fair amount. So one of the lectures I give every year is to our DBA cohort who come from the higher education sector. So these are leaders of higher education management. And so that, we're really thinking there about where do values, where does sustainability fit in across the organization? Is it in the teaching? Is it in the research? Is it in offering a platform for discourse? Is it simply in the way that we operate? We're a huge campus, does it matter how much energy we consume and whether and how the buses run, this kind of thing. So I guess what I would say is that they're all connecting. So if we think about the core role of the university, the teaching, the research, they kind of overlap and reinforce one another. And I think it's taking it all and doing whatever you can and doing more progressing that's more important, because I think that there's no one thing that sends a good signal. It's doing some things that are relevant and have impact that creates a kind of cultural influence. And actually, there was a study some time ago on the attitudes of students towards sort of their social conscience, their social responsibility. And it showed that if they were at a university that was taking sustainability seriously, it more or less didn't matter what they studied. They all shifted in terms of being able to appreciate and understand and engage with sustainability more. So it more or less didn't matter whether they were the ones studying business ethics or other courses, that because it was embodied around them in the way that the university functioned, that over the course of their studies, they were all demonstrating a higher engagement. So yeah, it's not going to be one thing is going to fix everything, but it is about doing things, right? And having that and it being authentic and meaningful. So I think increasingly with time, despite us seeing more activity in this space, we also become more cynical. And what can sound like a sort of a progressive value becomes a bit cheesy. And so we almost draw back a bit from some of these notions. So I think it's about that continuing engagement and not saying, oh, we've ticked this off our list, we're a sustainable organization. That doesn't ever exist. It's a process, it's an engagement, it's a relationship that you have to work on as you go forward. So not really sure if I've come to address the point there, but I do think universities have a really, really crucial role, and that is just spanning so many boundaries in terms of our relationships with students and with society and research and the impact that our research can have. And I think it's important that it all joins up and that it's perceived as being an authentic measure, real engagement that has at least some impact. And I don't think it matters occasionally if things are imperfect. I think being imperfect is actually part of it, isn't it? It's learning. I think sustainability is about learning, and we're better to learn it than a context of a university which can handle complexity. I think we come to universities because it's a place where we can start to grapple with things that are tricky and challenging and ask difficult questions.
And at the same time, never stop learning. It's a curiosity that educational learning for some people, or many people, sort of stops at 16, 18 or 21 or whatever. And anyone such as David in business, if you're not learning, you really are not progressing both as an individual and as a company. I would just like to thank Beata, by the way. Beata Cosgrove Arntz made that point. She's a terrific photographer we've been delighted to use for Bath Live and also the Creative Bath. And a quick call out as well, please do remember to use those that question function as well. We've had one, here we go. Our good old friend, anonymous attendee, making a first appearance today. As residents, we always ask, what could the university do for us? However, maybe we need to ask what we can learn from the university. How can it help us as businesses to improve our impact? I'd respond perhaps more generally here, dear Anonymous. That's one of the reasons why we do these webinars. It's precisely to bring academic thinking into commercial reality. And I'd hope there's been a few sort of prompts and stimuli here. Related one, again, it may be the same anonymous person, one doesn't know. That's the whole point of it being anonymous. Are there events at the university which Bath residents can attend to learn more about sustainability and values in business? Annie, maybe not chapter and verse, but as a principle, someone watching this, what might they do?
Well, that's such a great question. I think maybe we need to put together some information, but particularly now that we've had a number of events with Bath Life about this, ways in which the public could be involved. I don't to hand have that list, I'm afraid. I'd have to go on the website and have a look. But we're certainly really keen to involve all our alumni come up quite regularly for events, and that notion of engaging with the public is absolutely crucial for universities. I think it helps challenge us as well. And I think, like the comment, I expressed this sentiment of a kind of a two-way street, that I think if we sit in isolation in a university, then we're not going to learn ourselves about the impact. And I think then, it's bringing others into the university, which is crucial, which helps everybody learn and thrive. But that would be wonderful if we could get a list of events at the university where the public can come on, and like this, as you say, we have plenty of these kinds of webinars for people to sort of.
Indeed. And just on that front, far be it for me to bounce our either editorial or marketing teams, but I'm sure that in our coverage of this, whether live on Twitter now or subsequently in Bath Life, we'll be able to cite where to go to find out this sort of information. It's absolutely vital that from our point as well, that we play our part in helping university connect through the businesses of Bath. David, I wonder that you touched on the B Corp status. Could you do a little bit of stand back, because some might have heard the phrase B Corp, many of them won't. What is it? Why did Storm go for it? What does it entail?
Sure. So B Corp, I think that the fundamental principle of B Corp comes back to something we discussed earlier. And one of the biggest changes you make when you become a B Corp, which also very much describes what B Corp is a changing to the Articles of Association, which are essentially the rules and principles on which you legally are running your business. So earlier you stated that businesses are there to return profit to shareholders. The first thing that you should do as a B Corp is change that in your Articles of Association to say that you are putting environmental and social good at the same level as returning profit. So you are fundamentally addressing the issue you raised earlier, that it's shareholder value first. And everything else then kind of flows downhill from there. So some will see B Corp as a statement of intent that also ties into something that you and Annie have discussed, that this is not it's not a binary yes no, it's an ever improving and moving target. So you can become more B Corp if you like. In fact, you gain a B score having been through this process. I think Storm were very lucky to make it into triple digits, which isn't very usual for first-time applicants. But
you are so modest. But
we're a very long way away from the top, a very long way, which means there's still a huge amount more to do. And I think that one thing that that also I would say about B Corp is, and slightly to our dear anonymous attendees' point, or at least linked, I am wary of organizations, although it is arguably better than doing nothing, of organizations who look for things to do to be more sustainable. For me, the true route is to decide as an organization you want to become more sustainable and understand how and why that is something you should be doing, or why it makes sense for you. Adopt the principle first and have your mission. It's after that you then get into the what are the applicable ways or suitable ways to us. So rather than just, well, you can be more sustainable by triple glazing or something, which is a mechanism, that's kind of an aside. The real value comes when you change your core values, principles that underpin it. And what B Corp is doing is really challenging you across I believe it's 7 different sectors. Please don't ask me to name them all, but it's everything from how you treat your staff, your supply chain, the environment, your finances, your management. There are about 100 odd questions in each one of those, where you go through and score yourself, and you have to upload evidence. So it's a process that takes months and months to go through the application process for, but it really does get into every facet of your business. And loads of it, you may say, no, we don't do that. Or do you know what, I don't know, let's pick something. Yeah, maybe your extended adoption leave policy isn't as good as it could be. So you've only scored a 2 out of 10 there. But the point is, it really shines a light on every facet, and you understand, okay, I may well have passed and we may well have got a triple-digit score here, but oh my word, there is so much stuff that we could be doing more on. And that really is what B Corp is there to do. It's to say, no matter where you are as a B Corp or not, you are definitely not at the end. And there is a load more stuff you can do. So for those who are new, it welcomes them. And for those who are already in there, it encourages them forward. And that's what I love about it.
Thank you. I'm going to slightly cut across, because we will later in the year be returning to B Corp and running a special webinar with one of our commercial partners on this, of why some of the issues you've touched on. But I wanted to give, amidst all this lovely idealism and thoughtfulness and values-led thinking, a cynical question for you, which is this. Do you think there's any element, at least for some companies, that B Corp is essentially, it's the investors and people du jour, that it's a badge, and it's a badge which portrays values which, whilst they may be thorough in terms of accreditation, actually are consequential. They're just there to enhance the perception of the business?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that there's going to be, it's clearly not going to be a perfect system. Very few systems ever are perfect. And there may well be an organization that somehow has got, let's say, selfish reasons for enough of the things to score that you become B Corp. Right. But you'd have to, it feels like quite a far-fetched scenario where you happen to have been really, really good and lovely in all these scenarios that are normally driven due to environmental and sustainability reasons, but you happen to have got a selfish reason for them that's probably profit-driven. That's probably a very minute portion. I suspect there are organizations who perhaps would go through the process and scrabble over the line, but then have no intent on improving. And I think that B Corp themselves understand that that's the biggest area of risk, that you can take organizations so far, and it is a high bar. So that's great as a start, but there may not be an incentive then to continually improve year on year, because you already are B Corp. So yes, I suspect there is an element of that within there. And let's hope it's a small part.
It's a deft, polite and elegant way of saying that's a dumb question. So thank you for that. Let's again on a stand-back point here, that are broadly the ethical values that you've each been espousing, are they essentially more expendable in tough times? That CSR, charity, sustainability costs are some of the first line items to be cut as business gets harder, such as in a recession.
Annie, do you want to take that?
Sure, I'd love to take that. I think, yeah, that is a concern for us all. I think that's probably a key question for a lot of researchers right now as we come out of the pandemic. Something I suppose I'm mulling over. I think the answer is definitely not, provided we have an ability to think long term, be creative, imaginative, curious, these kinds of things. I think the principle still holds. But I'm also drawing on some of the discussion that where we were just at around the B Corps, thinking about how useful they are and what a support they can be for being more sustainable. And I think I suppose that that got me thinking a bit about what David was saying about the how and the why. If that you adopt the principle, that you come up with your mission and your values and you do that first, then that can help. And that we had this sort of counterexample where an organization might be being selfish. And I think in reality there's probably a bit more going on, because I think it is in the self-interest of businesses to make these claims, and then they go about trying to implement them, and things may have shifted. So the context may have changed. We may have had a pandemic in the meantime, and these things are no longer so salient. So it isn't necessarily a kind of by design sort of gap that comes up, but it's one that's kind of quite complex. But I did find it really heartening to hear the story that David was sort of recounting about signing up to B Corps. And I think that's a really good illustration about how certifications can be a great support for being more sustainable. And actually that can then help you through perhaps the leaner times, because you have your framework, your principles from which you can't vary. So it's there and established and it's understood. I think where things become more risky is when resources are limited. If instead of actually paying attention to the impacts of your business, you perhaps just try and adopt some more standards, you realize how useful it is for your business to appear to be doing all these wonderful things. And I think there comes a point where the rigor of these frameworks and certifications can dilute your attention on the issues, and we see a drop off. And I hope you don't mind, it's a neat segue to some research that I'm hoping to publish very, very soon. It's just been conditionally accepted, so fingers crossed it'll be out before long. And we found indeed that there's this really positive sustainability performance that can come about when a firm adopts a standard like a B Corp certification, because it does give this framework and support in a situation where, you know, the magic wand is not going to be there. But we also find that there can be too much of a good thing. So we find that if there's too much attention on these certifications, there seems to be a bit of a drift, and then the sustainability performance eventually declines. So, and I think that would be particularly relevant when resources become constrained. So when a context then changed, it's possible then we lose that connection between our aspirations, the standards that we've signed up for, and then the impacts. And so that would be what I would be most alert to, thinking about what then happens when we perhaps have less resources to apply to sustainability, that we tend then to do the sort of the shortcuts, perhaps, to then claim the sustainability without driving it in. And so there is an issue there, yeah.
And well, to a related point to that, isn't it, you know, one might think, isn't it only the successful companies who can afford to take this approach in general terms, but specifically when times are harder? Yeah,
I mean, I do think that the more resources you have, the higher your burden. And I would mean that in terms of the burden of expectation around you, I think is probably proportionate to the impacts that you have. And I think organizations that are thriving are particularly those ones that should be leading the way in this way. And so sometimes we hold up some organizations and say how wonderful they are for being sustainable. But when you actually look at the proportion of their profits that they're putting into these activities, despite it being really, really positive kind of a change that they've made, it is actually more PR because it is so inconsequential to the impact that they could have. So I think I'm with you on that point. I do believe that I think there's a French term, I'm afraid I speak French, but there's a term called noblesse oblige, which I think means that the kind of the higher the status, the greater the burden, the greater your obligation. And that's a kind of hunch that I've had for a while, that we should have high expectations of everyone. And I guess that's the higher, the more scope you have to have impact. I remember a talk by Mars, the brand, about what they can do. And they said that they were quite a small player in one market, which was, I think, to do with palm oil or something, where you would expect them to be having more of an impact. But actually what they were doing was just putting all their attention on cocoa, because they had a huge ability to influence the supply chains there. They were the primary provider. I mean, I'm sort of drawing on an example from many years ago. I don't know what the current status of the company is, but they have power. They can, and if they're prepared to put it to bear, they can make huge change, and they should.
Yeah, it's a key thing we've made as a company right at the centre of the Bath Life Awards, as well as Bath Life, that we all play our part in the city, and the bigger the company or the more influential it is, the greater responsibility to use its channels for the common good. Ultimately, that's a self-interested point up to a point, which is that we all benefit from it, so we might as well all contribute. We're all beneficiaries of that flowering of creativity 250 years ago. What are we doing now? As quick answer looking here, David, from good old Anonymous. How often is B Corp status reviewed to ensure companies are upholding the policies?
So you have to produce what's called an impact report annually, and you have to recertify. Gosh, it's certainly not the first 12 months. I can't remember whether it's got one of these MOT style scenarios where you get your first couple of years free and then it's every year. But I've got a feeling it might be biannually. You go through an update process with them. But you're supposed to produce an impact report, and you can self-review an update essentially at any point.
Another point about B Corp, it's obviously quite a key topic. It appears to be particularly sought after status in the Southwest, with more businesses here with B Corp status than any other areas of the UK. Is that a coincidence, or is it fundamentally businesses in the Southwest, not that we're seeking to praise every single business in the Southwest, are actually more thoughtful about business process, particularly sustainability?
Well, obviously, Greg, it's because Storm got one, so everyone else wanted one. I mean, I don't know.
Okay, I'm going to cut the conversation. That's enough.
I don't know, actually. That's a very good question. And one I'd quite like to know the answer to myself. All I would say is, in terms of the Bristol, Bath especially, have been always known in that respect in terms of their kind of environmental credentials. So I suspect there's an element of it. As for the rest of the Southwest, yeah, that's absolutely fascinating why that would have happened down here. I also wonder whether there's a correlation by sector. So I don't know whether particular sectors have adopted it, but yeah, I would love to know. Yeah,
I would imagine there'd be some sort of Venn diagram overlap between tech companies, but also the quality of life, which many individuals have, but companies wish in the Southwest. We're coming towards the end, but I want to come on to the last points about motivation. How important is being seen to be doing good? How important is that as opposed to actually doing that good? In other words, you play your credentials. Is that a key part of the motivation for companies?
That's a gosh, quick question at the end. Yeah, that one that's 20 minutes on that one if you needed. Let's brew it down to it's obviously great to be seen to be doing good because it will encourage others, or at least you hope that it'll encourage others. It's clearly better that you're seen to be doing good and are doing excellent work behind the scenes at all times anyway. So I think greenwashing is a term that I'd probably go to here. People don't like, or I feel it should be discouraged when organizations are very clearly doing things that are not actually as sustainable as they appear to be on the surface. So we don't like the doctoral spin that might come with messaging, but it's certainly important, I would say, even if you've done something that's small and impactful, as long as it's genuine and small, talk about it, because it might encourage other people who are also looking for those first baby steps to do something positive and small. I hope that's the question.
There is a lot there, you're right, but there's a related one as well, which is that we all know motivation is rarely singular. We don't do many things for just one reason. Does it actually matter if companies are doing good things, but for less good reasons, like being seen to be the good guys? Actions still do good, right? Regardless of motivation?
Yeah, I think they can, but I think that there's a risk they can backfire as well. So we don't know what's, if you're doing something for one purpose and hoping to win on another agenda at the same time, and things get complex quite quickly as things change. So yes, all impacts for change, no matter what motivated, is good, and what starts you off on that process. But I think there will be a potential to drift from those values we were talking about if it's for other purposes, and then there's a risk of a kind of a backlash if you're found out to be greenwashing.
We are unfortunately coming towards the end of our time. I've got one specific question for you, David, on co-forest, and then a general question for you each to end on. It is in this area of both idealism and sustainability. David, why did you start the co-forest? And for those purposes, those who may not know quite what it is, what actually is it? Give us the nutshell, if that's not an inappropriate metaphor.
Yeah, so what it actually is a project that's designed to bring together individuals and organizations who are like-minded, want to invest time and money into planting brand new woodlands around the UK, in a way that is actually sustainable. So not just planting random trees in random places, but the right trees in the right places. And it came about as part of our 10th anniversary at Storm. We had a bit of a kind of a survey of what we wanted to achieve over the next few years. At that point, the three things were a B Corp, which we managed, the Queen's Award for Enterprise, which we have since done, and also to offset the entirety of our carbon legacy from when we started through till that 10th anniversary. We fast forwarded, we looked at a lot of schemes that are international. I'm just going to leave this out here for people to research. A lot of them are very dodgy. And we looked at ones in the UK. a lot in Scotland, but not so many SMEs can engage with. We came to a point where we thought, sod it, we're going to buy our own land, we're going to plant our own trees, and then we'll know what's going on and be happy about it. We announced it at our 10th anniversary, which was attended by friends, colleagues, organizations, and a surprising number of them kind of said, yes, please, we'd like that as well. And we thought, okay, let's not be selfish. This won't be a Storm thing. We'll create a not-for-profit spin-out. We'll call it co-foresting, and people can come together. We raised about £250,000 within a week or two. I think it was something ridiculous. Bought a chunk of land just outside Bristol, and with 10,000 trees later, that project is just wrapped up. So we're now looking for our next lot of land. So if you sat out there and you can see a field opposite with a for sale sign on, please drop me an email.
That's as good as it gets. So, you know, in one respect, this is the ultimate idealism. It's physically create the world as you would wish it. And again, if I could balance both our editorial and marketing teams, let's make sure we link to Co-Forest in the reports about this in Bath Live and in social media around today's event. Anyone can get involved in different ways. And it's an extraordinary initiative, and bravo to you, David, and to Storm generally for that. Last question to you both. What advice or closing thoughts would you give to Bath companies watching this about sustainability and progressive business thinking?
Annie?
This is another fantastic question. I'm trying to think of a way to answer this very quickly, which is just go for it. I think this notion of being transparent about what you're doing and actually accounting for the things that you're doing, rather than feeling that you have to do what your neighbours are doing. I know that there's this idea of norms and we all expect certain things, but I think actually a genuine audit of what you actually do, the impacts that your business has when you talk about those things, I think could be very compelling ways to promote your business through sustainability, but as long as it's well linked to the things that you do as an organisation.
Great. I
completely
agree with that. I think that was wonderful. The only piece I would add is make time for sustainability, especially at the beginning. So set aside 2 or 3 hours, get your entire team, maybe a few stakeholders together, go for lunch somewhere sustainable, and talk about what sustainability could actually mean for your business, both in terms of how it fit with the values that you have, how it fits with the context in which you sit, your employees and in your market. If you make time for that conversation, you'll find that some really interesting things drop out, whether or not you like it. And I think that's the first step that businesses should be taking, is just start the conversation, because we all think about it and we know the word, but do we ever make time, even an hour, to really sit down and explore what it means for us? Probably not. So that's where I point.
There we have. It's time to wrap. Business absolutely starts with a conversation. Change happens with idealists. Change is promoted through universities, educational institutions. The world can be created differently, even when it is tougher economically. And whilst there may not be a direct read-over correlation between activity and success, the broad thrust of so much business, whether from a recruiting point of view or generating business point of view, is towards a more ethical way of running businesses. It's not solely about the bottom line, however important that is. We're going to close now, and I'd like to thank you to everyone involved in this Bath Life Business Surgery. Of course, our 2 speakers today, Annie Snelson-Powell of the University of Bath School of Management, and David Kelly, the founder of Storm Consultancy and the galvanic force behind Co-Forest. Thank you for all your time and questions, particularly our good friend and anonymous attendee, at this latest webinar in our Discovery series with the University of Bath School of Management. It'll be up soon on our Bath Life YouTube channel. Thank you, of course, for your support for Bath Life. As mentioned, it's our 21st year coming up, and we'll have some interesting celebrations for that. Look out for our upcoming business surgeries throughout the coming year, particularly with the uni again, and for those mighty Bath Life Awards. Nominations are closing soon, as mentioned. We're done. This has been a Media Clash production, and this has been the latest Bath Live Business Surgery. Thank you. Bath together, always.